Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, and today is Friday. It's Good Friday for anyone else who doesn't have religion, doesn't matter. So it's a great day, and there's some news going on about basketball. I'm going to talk about the NCAA. I'm also going to talk about, that's going to be the second section, but the first section is going to be Ice Cube's $5 million offer to Caitlin Clark to play in the Big Three. I talked about it in the fourth segment yesterday, but I mainly talked about Kenyon Martin Sr.'s reaction. His comments on Caitlin playing in that league. And then, as I said before, in the second segment, I'm going to talk about the Sweet 16 in NCAA, the matchups that happened last night, as well as the rest of the matchups that are happening tonight. And then in the third segment, I'm going to do a quick recap of all of the NBA games from last night. And then I'm going to talk about their playoff chances and what we should expect from these teams. And we also have a special fourth segment, so stay in tune for that. I reveal that in the end of the second segment. But before I begin, I'd like to remind everybody to please use the link in the description to get your comments recognized, or the link that is displayed below the ticker on every show segment. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Really helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself and you guys. And with that out of the way, we can go right ahead and go into the first segment, which is going to be talking about Ice Cube's offer to Caitlin. So it was announced on Wednesday that his Big Three basketball organization offered Caitlin Clark $5 million to play for the league. And obviously, Caitlin Clark, she's a current college superstar. And I believe this is the first time, this is the first time that a female has been offered a deal to play in the Big Three. Usually the Big Three is it's for players who have retired from playing in the NBA and overseas players. Those are what these players are composed of. So this is called a historic offer to a generational athlete, and Ice Cube said that he's still waiting for Clark to respond to the opportunity and to see if she takes it. I really think that she probably should take it. This is more money than she could probably ever make in the WNBA, strictly off contract business alone. So, she could probably make a lot more due to NIL deals and the marketing and, the inflation that's going to go, not the inflation, the revenue that the league is going to generate. But the contracts that she's going to get with her teams, I don't think they're really going to do much, because it's this is $5 million, and there's not a single female basketball player making that under a contract. So another quote is, "We intend to offer to remain private while Caitlin Clark plays for the championship." I believe this is Iowa's big offer. But I won't deny what's now already out there. Big Three made a historic offer to Caitlin Clark. Why wouldn't we? This is Ice Cube responding in a tweet. Caitlin is a generational athlete who can achieve tremendous success in the Big Three. So he said on Twitter that, X, I guess, I gotta get used to that name. I'm never gonna get used to that. The Big Three has already broken barriers by offering women head coaching jobs. So it's really no surprise that they decide to offer this kind of deal with Caitlin. And I'm really excited to see if she does end up playing for that league. It could be something I would really like to see that, because a lot of people say that there is a huge stipulation between women in sports and men in sports. And it's most of the time when women play the sport, there's a stereotype around that's these players aren't as good as the men. And because these players aren't as good as the men, it's not really worth watching them as opposed to watching the men, even though sometimes the women can end up winning and end up like getting championships in the respective league. Now, in terms of college, however, the story is a little bit different, where it seems like a lot of these college athletes, especially on the women's side, they're gaining a lot more traction and a lot more media coverage now. And because of the media coverage they're getting, this is allowing all of these college athletes to get NIL deals and thus make more money for themselves, more money off of name, image, and likeness than they would off of any kind of contract, which is usually which seems to be the best way of approach for these female athletes. Now, the only problem becomes if you have to be really, really good at that. Otherwise, you're not going to end up making as much money as the rest of them. So I'm just going to go ahead and look at Instagram to see if there's, and Twitter to see if there's any more news on Caitlin. And yeah, there is more news on Caitlin. So that means I have to do this. Hold on. So Caitlin Clark is now the only college player to be invited to a Team USA training roster. So this is obviously, again, she is very, very good at basketball, and almost she's getting so much respect from all of these all these other organizations and even Team USA basketball. Now, is it possible that she's going to make the USA roster? Probably for the women's. I don't know I'm pretty sure they don't allow the men's and the women's to play in the same game. But if she becomes a starter for Team USA in the Olympics, that would definitely bring a lot more attention to her, not just from a basketball perspective, but also globally. Being a USA athlete, being an Olympic athlete, it brings attention to across so many other countries, and it's the reason why the NBA and basketball became a global sport, because in '92 they allowed NBA players to participate or to be Olympic athletes, and they created the Dream Team. And once they created the Dream Team, the NBA started to become a global thing, and a lot more people started to watch the NBA and wanted to be like Michael and wanted to be like all the players that they saw on Team USA and that roster. And that winning mentality and all that essentially comes with being on Team USA. And it's you become known. And it's how LeBron is known globally as well. It's how Kevin Durant is known globally as well. And it's if you go to other countries, they will know those specific players because of their time on Team USA and watching them play. Now, obviously, I know those guys didn't play at the same time as Michael Jordan or the Dream Team, but they did make the Redeem Team. And Kobe was, if you watch that Redeem Team documentary, he was very, very famous over in China because of his similarities to MJ and because of already how global the game expanded. But in China, it was apparently a whole new level, or in wherever that Olympic was. It was a completely different level because it was everybody knew who Kobe was. And eventually, if things pan out the way they've been for Caitlin, everyone is going to know exactly who she is and what she has to bring to women's basketball and what she has to bring to basketball alone. And if we're going to be honest, there's a lot more stars, I guess you could say, in women's basketball, at least in NCAA. So compared to the men's side, when you look at the media stories, you don't really see one person per se. It's more like a team effort, and it's the player didn't do well, the team did well, the team beat them, they upset them. It's always a group thing. But in terms of women's basketball, there's always there's an easier way it seems easier to market like one female from each team that sticks out. And those are the females that end up getting famous and bringing the attention to women's basketball and NCAA basketball and the Sweet 16 and the NCAA tournament for the women's side, because now it's getting a lot more popular. Like the women's side already sold out in tickets much faster than the men. And I'm just going to look up some of the names of these. I just want to make sure that I'm getting the names right of these women players, because it's a lot easier to market them. Obviously, like you have Angel Reese, you have Elizabeth Kitley, Cameron Brink, and then Alyssa Pilley, and all of these other women players that are just very, very talented. That woman from UConn who completely shut down at Iowa. And it's like all of these women, they're very easily marketable, and they all make an appearance on like popular sports pages, and so it's very easy to market around them, make NIL deals around them. And I will say though, it's once you know like who the good players are and who the teams are, it just becomes a little bit easier to tell who's going to win. Like you can, in almost every single game, you can always tell that Caitlin Clark is going to win. And in almost every other game, you could tell that UConn is going to win. And it's like, it makes it a little bit more predictable. So, in my opinion, a little bit less fun. Because, like, Paige Buckers, like, or Paige Buchers, forgive me if I botched that last name. She's just so much better than every other female. Like, you can easily see that. She ended the game with 32 points and 10 rebounds. This was the second round, so she's the Sweet 16 for the women's side. It just started today, and UConn plays tomorrow. They play Duke tomorrow. So Carrito's in the chat. He's saying, "What do I think of North Carolina getting beat by a football school?" Getting beat by a football school. I mean, that's honestly, like, I was going to talk about that a little bit later, because, like, that's going to be the second segment, so, I'll save my opinions, like, for that, so just stay tuned for the second segment, and I'll tell you exactly what I think. But it is really crazy. Like, I did not expect that whatsoever. And, like, again, I'll talk about that a little bit later in the segment, or in the second segment. But yeah, so that woman from UConn, Buchers, she's just so much better than everyone else. And like, you know, Caitlin Clark, she's so much better than everyone else. Angel Reese, she's also much more skilled than everyone else. And it's like, there's not much of a competition when you look at all of these other females. And it's like, it's usually when they play each other that the game is much more interesting, which is, again, makes it a lot easier to market, because it's like how back in the day, Magic Johnson was easy against Larry Bird. It was easy to market them because they were two of the best. And Michael Jordan going up against Magic, again, two of the best, and so on and so forth. You get the idea. And tomorrow, UCLA plays LSU, so UCLA is ranked higher than LSU, so we'll see exactly if LSU can end up coming out on top. And if they end up winning, then I believe they could potentially either play Iowa or Colorado. Again, it depends on which teams win in their respective games. But with that, we are out of time for this segment, so I'm going to go ahead, because I really want to talk about college basketball and bring up how North Carolina got beat by a quote-unquote football school, if you want to call it that. So I will be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits, I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, we are going to be covering the Sweet 16 and some of the matchups that happened from last night, as well as the matchups that are going to happen tonight, because it's still going on. It's going to start at around 7, so be sure to tune into those games. But before I begin, I'd like to remind everybody to please use the link in the description to get your comments recognized, or use the link displayed below the ticker on every single show segment. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Really helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself and you guys. And with that out of the way, we can go right ahead and talk about the matchups that happened last night in the Sweet 16 and the NCAA tournament. So there were more upsets in this round than there were in previous rounds, which goes to the point that I brought up yesterday, saying that there's definitely going to be, the phone just keeps ringing, there's definitely going to be a lot more games that are going to be close going into the Sweet 16, and these games that are close are 3 out of 4, and like, no one really expected 3 out of 4 of these teams to end up winning and making it to the Elite Eight. So, for the first game, Clemson upset Arizona. They were the 6th seed. Arizona was the 2nd seed. The final score was 77-72. UConn ended up, that was the only team that was the major favorite that ended up winning. UConn ended up beating San Diego State 82-52. The only blowout that happened last night. Then in the next game, Alabama upset the number 1 UNC. So that was incredibly surprising because, again, Alabama is mainly known for football and not necessarily known for basketball. So the fact that they made it to the Elite Eight is very impressive. I talked about their head coach in the previous podcast. I knew he was going to make a difference. This was a very high-scoring game. And, it's, again, like I had mentioned in the previous podcast, Alabama really relies on their offense. And the game was close because UNC was only 2 points behind them. And, again, it's just because they didn't have defense. Hopefully it won't affect them going into the next round where they have to go ahead and play Clemson, but we'll see how that goes. That game is going to happen tomorrow at 8:49, so be sure to tune into that game as well. But essentially, like, all of these games, like, a lot of them were very, very surprising with the outcome. So Chase Hunter scored 18 points, converted on a 3-point play with 25.7 seconds left, and they ended up beating Arizona 77-72, like I mentioned previously. And PJ Hall had added 17 points for the Tigers, and they advanced to face either the they advanced to play Alabama in the next round. So Clemson last reached the Final 8 in 1980, when there was 48 teams in the NCAA tournament, Coach Brad Brownwell was making his second appearance in the second week of March Madness and in his 14th season with the Tigers. So Omar Ballo scored 15 points and Caleb Love 13 for the second-seeded Arizona, which was really bad shooting from the field last night. They were 5 of 28 from 3. That's 17%. Love missed all 9 of his shots from the three-point line, and the Wildcats failed to reach the Elite Eight for the 12th time overall and the first time since 2015. So the Wildcats coach Tommy Lloyd was outset in the Sweet 16 for the second time in his 3 seasons. So UConn going up against San Diego State. Stefan Castle, he ended the game with 16 points and 11 rebounds for UConn, and defending NCAA champion UConn decided to advance in the Elite Eight with another double-digit victory, beating San Diego 82-52. Cam Spencer scored 18 points. Tristan Newton added 17 points and 7 rebounds, and they will play the winner of the East region between Iowa State and Illinois, and that winner is Illinois. So they will compete against them for the spot in the Final Four. And a year after cruising to their 5th national championship, and they're probably going to win. They won their 6th NCAA tournament game by averaging almost 20 points, and the Huskies followed up blowouts last weekend with their 9th straight double-digit March Madness victory. So UConn basically had a home crowd in this game because the game was played in TD Garden, which gave them a very huge advantage, and Boston is about 90 miles from Storrs' Connecticut campus, and the Huskies made a double-digit lead early in the second half, 20 with about 7 minutes left and 30 in the final minutes after the team sent in their benches. So obviously this was just a very dominating win from the Huskies, and one that you'd really expect coming in from them. The 7-footer Donovan Clingan played 23 minutes, just getting into foul trouble. He had 8 points and 8 rebounds. Jaden Lee scored 15 of his 18 points in the first half for the San Diego State, which followed up with the only Final Four appearance in school history with another Sweet 16 run. So Alabama going up against UNC, that was the most popular game because it ended in a huge upset. Grant Nelson converted a go-ahead 3-point play with 38 seconds remaining, and Alabama beat the top-seeded North Carolina 89-87. Nelson finished with I like that name. Finished with a season-high 24 points, 19 in the second half, and he blocked R.J. Davis's attempt at a game-tying layup after giving Alabama the lead. Rylan Griffin added 19 points, tying his career high with 5 3-pointers, and Aaron Estrada scored 19 for the 4th-seeded Crimson Tide. So the Tide faced 6th-seeded Clemson on Saturday for their first Final Four appearance, and the Tigers defeated the 2nd-seeded Arizona, as I mentioned previously. So after Nelson blocked Davis's shot with 25 seconds left, Davis furiously dribbled around before missing a layup, and Tar Heels got called for a shot clock violation with 8 seconds left, and they were forced to foul, sending Nelson to the line, and he made both of the free throws, making the lead 89-85. And then Armada Bacot scored inside with 1 second left, leaving North Carolina trailing 89-87. So Heels fouled Nelson again with 0.9 seconds left. He missed both, and time expired, and the Blue Blood Tar Heels, who own 6 national championships. So Bacot finished with 19 points and 12 rebounds for UNC. Cormac Ryan had 17 points and made 5 3-pointers, and 5 3-pointers, and Davis had 16 points. So let's go ahead and look at the next game that happened. Illinois going up against Iowa State. Terrence Shannon Jr. ended up scoring 29 points and Illinois reached the Elite Eight the first time since 2005. So they beat Iowa State 72-79. And Shannon had 20 points in the first half for the third-seeded Illinois, who never trailed. Never in this game did they trail. And he broke away for a dunk in the closing seconds and later hit 2 free throws to help Illinois finally put away the second-seeded Cyclones. So, Illinois made a regional final for the 4th time in the past 40 years and will meet the defending champion UConn on Saturday for a trip to the Final Four. And the top-seeded Huskies defeated San Diego State, as I mentioned previously. Curtis Jones scored 26 points to lead Iowa State, which came into March Madness having blown out Houston for the Big 12 tournament title. So, going into the matchups into the Elite Eight that we know, I think UConn is going to end up beating Illinois. As I said previously, UConn is the most complete team in this tournament, so I think they have the best chances of making it out of the Elite Eight and winning against Illinois. Now, Alabama going up against Clemson. I think I have my money on Alabama for this one just because of how good they've been scoring, and I think overall their team is just a little bit better than Clemson. And if Alabama could continue their scoring the way that they have and they don't get worried and they don't let the pressure get to them, I think they'll be fine. I have enough faith in Alabama. I mean, again, it's pretty impressive that they've made it this far. So I wouldn't really say that they have much to lose, but no one really expects much for them, and no one really has that much pressure on them, I guess you could say, because again, they're mainly a football school, or they're known for being a football school. So, going into the games tonight in the Sweet 16, North Carolina State is going up against Marquette. So that game is going on at 7 o'clock, and I have Marquette ending up winning this one because they are a higher seed and they do play very well together. They can go on runs. They do have the defense. They have a very strong core, and I really like the roster that they do have and their chances going into tonight, just because they are seeded higher for a reason, and I really think that this is going to be a good team that can end up winning going into this game. So it's going to begin with the Eagles seek their first trip in the Final Four since Dwayne Wade. So Dwayne Wade was the player that made the school famous in 2003, and they've gone from the team that they're going against, they've gone from unlikely ACC champs, North Carolina State, to even unlikelier bracket busters. So Marquette is a scrappy bunch with Tyler Kolek and Cam Jones. They lead a dynamic backcourt, and they can score with anyone. The Eagles might not have an answer inside for North Carolina State's DJ Burns, but lockdown defender Stevie Mitchell could bother the Wolfpack's DJ Horn. So that's what they have going for them right now. The next game going into the Sweet 16 is Purdue going up against Gonzaga. So in terms of recent history, Gonzaga is the most accomplished program to reach Detroit as it participates in its 9th consecutive Sweet 16. The Bulldogs will be underdogs against Purdue and will look to continue its redemption tour with the home crowd on its side. So this game is a rematch of a meeting in November at Maui Invitational. A 10-point win for the Boilermakers en route to the tourney title. The Zags had no answers for Zach Edey, in the encounter, and they're hardly alone in that regard. There's no one that can really stop him, so if he has a good game, it's really game over at that point. So Gonzaga's offensive efficiency has improved, however, over the latter half of the campaign. They'll add Nolan Hickman to keep knocking down threes in order to stay with the Boilermakers, And when Purdue struggles to close it, is usually because of turnovers, but Braden Smith has done better against heavy ball pressure as a sophomore. Now, the next game that's going to be going on is, well, after those games at 9:39 is Houston going up against Duke. So in Dallas, it features a pair of programs with recent Final Four trips. Though the Cougars, they're still seeking that first championship. Houston still owns the nation's stingiest defense. Jamal Sheed is one of the hardest working men in the game at both ends of the floor. The experienced hands of Jeremy Roach could help the Blue Devils weather the Cougars' press. But what Duke might need most is a big game from Kyle Flipkowski in the paint. That's going to be the difference maker in this game. Then the next game at 10:09 is Tennessee going up against Creighton. The last contest of the round could be the best game going into the tournament, and the Blue Jays look to reach the Elite Eight for the second consecutive season, while the Volunteers hope to get at least one step farther than they managed to in 2023. So there's no idea how this game is going to unfold. The firepower on both sides for track meet to break out, like they both have a lot of offense, so anyone can go on a run at any time. It could also bog down in a defensive struggle because of how high-powered their offense really is. It largely hinges on whether Tennessee's first few three-point attempts can go in. Dalton Netsch and Josiah Jordan-James, they're capable of matching daggers with Creighton's Baylor Sherryman. Again, forgive me if I botched that last name. And Trey Alexander. But the Volunteers are also equipped to clamp down the defense if their shots aren't falling. And if it comes down to a battle of the boards, the Blue Jays big man Ryan Kalkbrenner could find himself outnumbered out there in the paint. And that's the recap of the games that are going down tonight and what happened last night. So with that, we're out of time for this second segment. So tune in for the third segment as I give a quick recap of the games, the NBA games that happened from last night, as well as talk about their playoff chances, since the NBA playoffs is looking to start relatively soon, since the season's almost over. So I'll be right back after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we are going to do a quick recap of all the games that happened last night. There were only 2 of them, so it'll be relatively short, the recap, but I'm going to be talking about each team that played and their playoff chances, what I think each team is their ceiling, and what I think is the worst thing they could possibly do. So the Boston Celtics, they ended up playing the Hawks. I thought this was going to end up being a good win for the Celtics, and they ended up playing all of their players, so I didn't expect them to do that either. I thought they were going to sit out since they already clinched the playoffs and they already have the 1 seed on locks. Jason Tatum, he ended the game with 31 points and 13 rebounds. Derek White ended the game with 22 points, 7 rebounds, and 5 assists. Porzingis ended the game with 20 points and 7 rebounds. Jaylen Brown ended the game with 18 points and 4 assists. So it's not like the team really played that bad in this game. They ended up shooting 38% from 3, 14 of 36, which again seems to be the common theme with this team and could possibly lead to their downfall. Like I mentioned previously, that this is a team that relies on the three-point shot a lot. So if the threes aren't falling, then that is a serious problem for the Boston Celtics. Now, DeJounte Murray, he ended the game with 44 points. However, he also ended the game shooting 18 of 44. So he took 44 shots and ended with 44 points, 6 of 19 from the field, 2 of 2 from the free throw line. Now, obviously, can't really say much about it because he ended up getting the win, and the only Westbrook and Kobe have taken more shots in a game over the last 20 years than 44 shots, which is honestly ridiculous coming in from DeJounte Murray. Like, that is, and I thought Jordan Poole was a shot chucker. That is 44 shots for one player is insane. He almost took half of their shots. Like, the rest of the team took 60 shots, but he took 44. That alone is really ridiculous. But I mean, he ended up getting 44 points and ended up hitting the game winner in overtime. So I guess that's, and he ended up scoring all the points in overtime as well. So I guess there's you can't really say much when you end up getting the win. So let's look at the rest of the stats real quick. Bogdanovich ended the game with 24 points, 5 assists, and 7 rebounds. DeAndre Hunter ended the game with 21 points and 13 rebounds. Clint Capella ended the game with 12 points and 13 rebounds as well. And that was basically it in terms of production and scoring because, I mean, DeJounte Murray was the one taking all of the shots. So couldn't really get anyone else going other than those few people if there's that one person that's just taking every single shot. But regardless, that's a win, which, I mean, it doesn't really, they're in no danger of losing their play-in spot, Atlanta. Right now, they're the 10th seed, and the team below them is the Brooklyn Nets, and if you guys have paid attention, you know that is my favorite team, and I know that team is not going to do anything, and they are not going to be able to catch up to make the play-in. I just know that. And the Hawks, they basically, like, they have it. Like, there's no real competition. Unless they lose out, surprisingly, and one of the teams just below them ends up winning a bunch of games in a row, but I don't see that happening in the near future. So, going into the playoffs, however, they look to be playing the Chicago Bulls in the first round of the play-in, and they have to win that round in order to advance and either play between the Sixers or the Heat. Now, depending on how the matchup goes, and depending on Joel Embiid's status and how well he plays, I think that the Hawks look like they're going to be playing the Sixers, which is a team that they've beaten before, and now they don't have I mean, it's a good thing they don't have Ben Simmons, but they don't have Harden, who I think was a better acquisition. So, but still, I think the Hawks would end up losing to the Sixers in the end. So their ceiling is one play-in win for me, and that's really disappointing, especially for a team that has someone as talented as DeJounte Murray, and how several years before, well, not several years before, but a few years, like one time in a few years, like in 2021, they ended up winning a bunch of playoff games and ended up going all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals, and now they struggle to make it to the play-in. Now, as for the Boston Celtics, as you guys most definitely know from the rest of the podcast that I've done and that I've covered, you know that the Celtics, they are easily the favorites to make it all the way to the finals. And even though they ended up losing this game, they're still in no jeopardy of losing the 1 seed. And they could end up playing either the Sixers, the Heat, the Bulls, or the Hawks. So either one of those teams has a chance of playing in the 8th seed and being an 8th seeded team. And with that in mind, I just don't really see the Celtics losing to any of those teams at all. I don't see them losing to the Bulls. I don't see them losing to Atlanta again in a series nonetheless. And I don't expect them to lose. I don't expect them to lose to the Sixers. Because every single year, the Boston Celtics, they always beat the Sixers. With or without Embiid, does not matter. And I just don't really see them losing in the first round. Then, the only team that I could really see them losing to, in the East, is the Bucks or the Knicks, and even then, the Celtics, well, the Bucks and the Knicks should be more afraid of the Celtics than the Celtics should be afraid of either of those teams. So, really, the only team that genuinely has a shot of beating them is the Denver Nuggets. And the Denver Nuggets are they're the only team that has beaten them twice. And they are the defending champions, and they're probably the biggest threat to the Boston Celtics championship success. Now, if that's not the team that they're going to be playing against, another terrible matchup could be the Clippers, because the Clippers have pretty good perimeter defenders to defend Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, and they could make a really good run if they play well. The Clippers haven't been playing well, however, as well as the Celtics even, so I think the ceiling for the Celtics is going to be the NBA Finals and Championship, and the lowest point that they could hit is losing in the Eastern Conference Finals. I think that's the lowest that they could go. If they do it again, because they have a really bad history of losing in the Eastern Conference Finals in the previous decades that have been going on. So those are those teams, and those are the teams in my opinions on their playoff predictions, and like where their ceiling is and where their low point is. Next game on the list is the Pelicans going up against the Bucks. So the Pelicans ended up winning 107-100, and this was a really good game, but a really bad coaching game from Doc Rivers. Again, it's just this was a really big game in terms of matchups. Giannis ended the game with 35 points and 14 rebounds. He was incredibly dominant, so this was a wasted game from Giannis because the rest of the supporting cast just wasn't there. Brook Lopez ended the game with 7. Chris Middleton also ended the game with 7. And Damian Lillard ended with 20, was the second best scorer in the game, which really says something because 20 points being the second best scorer, it could either mean one of two things. Either the rest of the team was playing really well, or no one was playing really well. And in this game, no one was really playing well. Because shooting 8 of 16 for 20 points, Damian Lillard needs to produce a lot more offensively if this team wants to go anywhere besides losing in the first or the second round. And Chris Middleton shot 3 of 12. That is not helping the team whatsoever. He really needs to step up his game come playoff time. And on the Pelicans side, CJ McCollum ended up out-dueling Damian Lillard in this matchup. 25 points, 7 assists, 7 rebounds. Zion Williamson ended the game with 28 points. No Brandon Ingram as well in this game, and that showed to be no problem for the Pelicans. Jonas Valanciunas ended the game with 17 points and 10 rebounds. So obviously a great game for the Pelicans. And Trey Murphy III ended the game with 15 points and 11 rebounds. they shot the ball very well too. Zion shot 9 for 15. CJ was 9 for 24, but still, like, he still played a little bit better than Dame, ended up getting a few more points than him, and ended up getting better overall stats. And it was just a better game coming in from the Pelicans, and they really turned it around. CJ pins the turnaround on them losing to the Lakers. Of course, it goes back to the Lakers. And they ended up getting blown out in that game, and that's sort of like, ever since then, they've just like completely flipped the switch, and now they hold the 5th seed in the Western Conference, and they confidently hold it. They're ahead of the Mavericks by 2 games, so they look poised to play the Clippers in the first round. Now, this matchup is going to be very interesting because the Pelicans, they usually beat the Clippers in the regular season. So if that's the same trend going into the playoffs, then I wouldn't be surprised if the Pelicans can pull off an upset beating the Clippers. So I think the Pelicans' season and their ceiling is probably going to be a Western Conference Finals appearance, and their low point is losing to the Clippers. Actually, wait, no, I lied, because there's still a possibility that the rest of these teams, their low point would be that they would have to go into the play-in and then play as a 7th or an 8th seed, because the Western Conference is incredibly close, and it's a lot more difficult to decide on where each team is going to be seated once the season ends. So if the Mavs end up winning a lot more games than the Pelicans to close the season out, there's a possibility that the Pelicans could play the Thunder in the first round, or the Timberwolves, or the Nuggets, which is probably the least favorable matchup that they would want. So I think, I still think their ceiling is it could be the Western Conference Finals, but their low point could be, honestly, losing in the play-in to the Phoenix Suns and then losing to the Lakers. That could be the low point, just losing in the play-in for this Pelicans team, because of how good the Western Conference really is. But hopefully, it's probably not going to get to that point. I think the Pelicans are going to stay afloat in the playoffs, and they're going to hold a playoff spot. So no need to worry about play-in type of I don't think they need to worry about the play-in at all. Now for the Bucks, I think they should worry completely. They still have the 2nd seed, so it's not like they're going to... the Knicks are 2 games behind them, so they could see them drop in the seeding, but at the worst they could probably get to is the 4th seed or the 5th seed. I could see that could be the worst seed that they get to. And even then, if that's the worst seed, the matchups that they get is probably going to be a little bit better than the matchups that they could get in the first round. Now, depending on how the seedings end, the Pacers could end up dropping to the 7th seed and taking the 7th seed after winning a bunch of play-in games, depending on how the seeding goes. So if the Bucks have struggled against the Pacers every single time in the regular season. So I think their ceiling is an Eastern Conference Finals appearance, and they end up losing to the Celtics because the Celtics are just a much better team. Now, their low point could be losing in the first round to the Pacers or to the Miami Heat yet again. Simply, oh my gosh, that's actually the low point, losing to the Heat in particular, because the Heat, they were expected to get Damian Lillard this previous offseason, and they ended up not getting him. So there's a lot of bad blood with Damian Lillard in Miami a little bit because they felt like they got played, but that could be the low point of that team. And with that, that's the end of the 3rd segment, and we are out of time. So now we are going to go into the 4th segment, where I talk about the possibility of Paul George joining the 76ers next season. So I will be right back after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, we are going to be talking about the possibility of Paul George joining the Sixers this coming off-season. So, the Clippers, they've already worked out a contract extension with Kawhi Leonard, and the next order of business would really be to sign Paul George to a new deal. So, they can't really sign Harden to an extension during the season. That's not permitted by his style of contract. That's what Windhorse is saying. So that's not a surprise nothing's happened there. But it's now been 3 months, give or take, and there's been no agreement on Paul George. And the word in the NBA is that they're apart. It's not like, let's have a big problem. They're apart. That's the quote. So there's a possibility that Paul George could end up leaving the Sixers the Clippers, and go to the Sixers if the Clippers don't give them or don't match the contract that he wants. So it's going to be a contract decision, and there have been rumblings that the Sixers intend to make a big push for Paul George if the Clippers can't match that deal. And obviously, Joel Embiid is probably going to try to recruit Paul George to the team because, it would be nice to have, a big three of Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, and Paul George. I think the quote, there's a quote here saying, "I think the league believes that Paul George wants to remain a Clipper, and there would be concern in the league about recruiting Paul George, especially if you had to give away players to open up space. My informed speculation is that eventually Paul will agree to a deal with the Clippers. It may not be for the full max, but it may be for more than what the Clippers have been offering." Now, one possibility could also be that Paul George is using this as leverage to get the Clippers to offer him a little bit more money, because if he has other teams interested in him and interested to pay him, then he could he could go ahead and say, "Oh, well, I have this team that's offering me this amount of money, but you're offering me less. So what's stopping me from picking the team that's giving me more money?" Which is the leverage that a lot of these athletes would like to get when they're making these kind of deals. There was some surprise with Leonard signing a 3-year, $153 million extension in January. The deal came in under the $161 million max value he would have been eligible for. So I guess they're trying to, Kawhi Leonard wants to create enough cap space for Paul George so that way they could end up paying him a little bit more, as well as giving money to James Harden to keep Harden on the team, because that's the other issue with the Clippers, that it might prevent them from giving Paul George his money, James Harden, and the value that James Harden brings to the franchise as well. So it's going to be a difficulty if they're going to have to pay both of those players a lot of money, and both of those players are probably Harden is a little bit more open to taking pay cuts. He did take a pay cut with his time on the Clippers, so I wouldn't be surprised if things if relationships stay well within the team, he could end up signing not an extension, but he could end up taking a pay cut, allowing Paul George to stay on the team as well and keeping that big three alive in the Clippers organization. So that's a possibility as well. So Leonard told reporters after a win over the Toronto Raptors on January 10th that he is confident, based on his conversations with Paul George and James Harden, that they would be with the Clippers in 2024 and 2025. So he said, with the conversation that I have with them about it, I think the most part everything is coming back. So with me signing an extension, I think it gives us a chance to sign both of those players. So that's what they have going for them. NBA insider Mark Stein recently reported that there are suspicions around the NBA that the Clippers have been offering George an unknown amount shy for the deal that Leonard signed. So Paul George has a $48.8 million player option for next season and is eligible to sign a 4-year, $221.1 million deal with the Clippers this summer. The max can sign with another team for 4 years and $212 million. So the Clippers have decided how much they want to commit to Harden, and like I said previously, so he'll become a free agent in the summer after being acquired in trade, and they're paying $342 million between payroll and luxury tax payments this season. The Warriors are the only team spending more on their roster than the Clippers right now, with $382 million coming in from Golden State, possibly $342 million. Well, $342 million coming in from the Clippers. So really, really difficult decisions coming in from the Clippers and what they decide to do in this offseason. I think signing Paul George would be the best move, simply because Paul George has been with the team a lot longer than James Harden has. Not entirely sure where Harden's loyalties stand in terms of the teams. I think he's just trying to go to whichever team has the best chances of winning a ring. And I guess if he stays with the Clippers, he has that best chance. But again, I don't know what his thought process is. But that's basically the end of the fourth segment. And with that, we are out of time and done with this podcast. So thank you for tuning in to GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. Once again, please use the link in the description or the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment to donate to the podcast. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Puts your comments directly above my screen. It helps the show, makes the show much more interactive. And that's the end of the podcast. Thank you once again. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.